glasses, and I realized that I never ever looked at them. So now I'll like type up sometimes the class or write it up and then just hope I remember it. Because I can't do both. I can't remember where I'm holding the notes to check. So today, I thought we'll learn one more thing about self-refinement because we have a few more days, and it's an optimistic, good morning, it's an optimistic, in my opinion, approach that the Rebbe gives us to self-refinement, and a relevant and practical one. And so, for those who were here last year, you probably learned this. We did learn this inside last year. I'm going to give it over to you today, and then tomorrow we'll do something also outside, some Chassidus on Shavuos. Okay. So what we're learning is based on the Rebbe, 7th Lubavitch Rebbe's Mimer from Tafshin Yud Aleph, which is 1951. What year did the Rebbe become Rebbe? 1950. 1951. Yes, for 43 years. Yes. So in 1950, the previous Rebbe passed away. And it took a full year until the yahrzeit, the day of passing, a full year later for the Rebbe to actually accept the Messias, we call it, the leadership.
Want to accept it?
For a year he didn't want to, until after a year he accepted it. And that was in Shvat, so Yud Shvat. So that was a few months ago. So now, if you think, if we're in 1951, which is right when he accepted, a few months in, is Sfir Somer. So the first Chassidic discourse Mayanot that the Rebbe gave, one of the first year that he was talking about Sfir Somer, there's a mimer from that time called Usfartim Lachem, which is based off of the original verse in Parshas Emor, where we get the original commandment to count the Omer, and then is based on the original mimer of the Alter Rebbe by the name of Usfartim Lachem, where there the Alter Rebbe explains the idea of that counting also means to make shine, and that the whole idea is to make our animal soul shine and to refine it. A lot of the things that we've been really learning about in Ki Yakriv are very correlated and connected. And so what the Alter Rebbe did in this, what the Rebbe did in this mimer in 1951, called Usfartim Lachem, was that first of all he starts just giving us a classic explanation of what is Sfira Somer, which if you read it in the beginning, it'll be a breeze because it's everything that we learned in Ki Yakriv. The idea of Isra Sidila Sate, Isra Sidila Eila, Pesach, Sfira Somer, Shavuos, the emphasis on us needing to put in our own work to make it last. Why did the Jewish people run out of Egypt and escape instead of leaving in a timely manner? All the things that we learned about is how the Rebbe opens up this mimer of Usfartim Lachem. And then the Rebbe starts to explain this in more detail, in more specifics. What the avoda, what the service of counting the Omer and of the korban Omer represents in our day-to-day life. And that's when the Rebbe goes more specific. And the Rebbe says that the commandment to count the Omer is very much connected to the commandment to bring the korban Omer, right? Which we learned about, the Omer, the body, right? And the Rebbe basically breaks down and explains to us what each of these avodas actually represents in our day-to-day life. So the korban Omer, the Omer sacrifice that was brought the day after Shavuot, where they would bring the barley and it was waved and it was the whole thing. The Rebbe explains there that represents the refinement, because it's animal food, right? So the korban Omer was animal food. So it represents a refinement process with our animal soul. What specifically? The Rebbe explains that's referring to the refinement of the mind, of the chokhmah, bina, and das, the intellectual faculties of the animal soul. And that was represented by the avodah of bringing this korban, the sacrifice in the temple. What that actually means, to refine and elevate the mind of the animal soul, not the thoughts, okay? Thoughts are called levushim, clothing. Those are in our control. Just like clothing, we can decide what clothing we're going to wear today. Our thoughts we can switch out. So the mind of the animal soul is not talking about the thoughts of the animal soul. It's talking about literally the mind, the subconscious, the way that it works. The automatic, have you heard of ants? Automatic negative thoughts? It's like, people call it ants. The automatic thoughts before they're actually in our control. Where are they going? And if the animal soul is in its regular animal state, they're usually going towards the animalistic things. Ego, short-sightedness, anxiety, the normal things that the animal soul is worried about and is designed in its DNA to be thinking about and wanting. So refining the animal soul's mind, means that the subconscious workings of the animal soul's mind have been given over to Hashem, have been transformed. It's an incredibly, incredibly lofty level, which is not something that's in our, not only in our ability, it's not expected of us to do today. The Rebbe says that the fact that we don't have the korban over today, why don't we have the korban over today?
We don't have, how to call it, infrastructure for it into the temple.
Which infrastructure?
The temple.
The temple. We have a very strict law in Judaism that if you do not have the temple and the Mizbeach, you cannot bring sacrifices outside of the Mizbeach.
At least we have barley.
At least we still have barley, yes. Today we eat it, not just the animals, right? So there's something called bamot. Those were like pop-up Mizbeachs where people would bring their own sacrifices, and those were outlawed. Those were like a no-no, okay? Sacrifices had to be within the framework of the temple. The moment that the temple was destroyed, we no longer had sacrifices. The sacrifices are not relevant for us until the temple is rebuilt. The Rebbe says we learn from that we learn from the fact that we do not do the korban omer today, that the avoda represented in the korban omer, which is the work of elevating what's called the meichin, the mind of the animal soul, is not expected of us today. So we shouldn't try, which is good, because what would that even look like? That's really, the Rebbe doesn't say this outright, but it's avodas, it's what would the tzaddikim refining and elevating spirits omer? Those things, subconscious, deeper intellectual things. Then we have the counting of the omer, okay? And there's a question among not Chassidic rabbis, but actual rabbis who wanted to interpret the law, whether the counting of the omer is a commandment that's relevant for us today or whether it's not, okay? And this goes back to the question of whether it's a biblical commandment or whether it's a rabbinic commandment. Did you guys learn this about Sfiras Omer, whether it's a biblical or rabbinic? No. Okay. What does a biblical commandment mean?
It's written in the Torah.
That is written in the Torah. That the Torah gave us this commandment. And what's a rabbinic commandment?
It's extrapolated from the Torah
By
the rabbis.
Exactly. Extrapolated from the Torah by the rabbis. And so there's a big question among the poskim who ask, is the counting of the omer, we know that giving the sacrifice of the omer today is biblical, it's from the Torah, and the rabbis do not say we do that today, right? The question is counting the omer biblical from the Torah, or is it something that the rabbis told us to do?
It's in the Torah. I read it in English.
Okay. It says it in the Torah.
Yeah.
Very good point. So why then would it even be a question if it's a biblical commandment or a rabbinic commandment? That's so weird. There's a very strong opinion that the counting of the omer today is rabbinic, from the Tosfos.
Is it because there's no temple?
What would the connection be between counting the omer and the temple?
There's no thing to actually do. Like, we're not actually bringing the omer, like, on the day of, right? Like, so what are we counting?
So that's the argument.
Okay.
The argument that the Tosfos says for why actually counting the omer today is a rabbinic commandment and not biblical, even though it says it in the Torah, is because if you read in Pashas Emor in the Torah where it commands us to count, it tells us bring a sacrifice called the omer in the temple, and you should count, and it's brought together. And so the Tosfos opinion, and all those who say that counting today is rabbinic, the opinion says because they were brought together, they're related very strongly to each other. So if we don't have the temple, we don't have the sacrifice, we don't have the biblical obligation of counting. Why then do we everyone agrees that we do count today. The question is just, is it rabbinic or biblical? Why then would we say that that's a rabbinic commandment? To count today, even though it's tied to the sacrifice which we no longer have. So it's not biblical.
From last year, I remember only the difference between days and weeks.
Okay, that's the
But I
punchline.
don't, yes, sorry. I don't remember, which is funny, because we used to help each other with this mimer a lot. Everybody remembered different parts.
Yes.
When somebody starts saying as it were Torah and forgets this part, somebody would come and
Someone
help.
come
And
in
now
and come
I
to
need somebody
help.
to come and help.
So it's if we say that, if the Tosfos says that it's not a biblical commandment to count because it's connected to the Omer sacrifice, which we no longer have, and therefore to count is rabbinic, it's from the rabbis. What does that mean? It's actually not. It's a straightforward question. It's not like a trick question.
That what we do right now is extrapolated from what we were actually commanded to do. It's not the same thing.
Correct.
So what were they actually doing at the time of the temple?
That's the question. What were they doing in the time of the temple that has been extrapolated? Good word, I like it. For that the rabbis then told us to do. There's a subsection of rabbinic laws which are called Zecher LaMikdash. Has anyone heard of this? Zecher LaMikdash. Zecher means, what does Zecher mean? Remember. Mikdash, the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. There's a whole category of rabbinic laws where the rabbis said, we do things today not because we're biblically commanded to do them, because they're tied to the temple being around and the service of the temple in some way, and yet the rabbis put in place that we need to keep those things to date as a zecher l'mikdash, to remember what they used to do in the temple. Okay, and there's actually like two. Zecher l'skor means it can also mean to mention, like to keep and to remember, and also to like to mention it. So there's two ways of understanding zecher l'mikdash. One is that the rabbis wanted us to remember what they did in the temple, because Mashiach is going to come, and we're going to need to know these things. Otherwise, there's going to be like a whole second. There's a whole bunch of mitzvahs that Mashiach's going to come. We don't know what this is. We have to learn from scratch. So we remember what they used to do, to literally just remember it. And the other is to mention it, to relive it in our own way, even though we don't have the temple. An example of this is challah, by the way. The mitzvah of challah is a biblical commandment in the land of Israel. If you look in the text, if you're in the land of Israel, it's a biblical commandment like challah. However, we make a blessing on separating challah. Has anyone made a blessing on separating challah outside of Israel? It says in the Torah that it's a mitzvah that's dependent on the land of Israel. So why are we saying a bracha outside of Israel? Because that's one of the things that's called zecher l'mikdash, that the rabbis put in place, that you, even if you're outside of the land of Israel, because they knew that Jews were leaving, you do that as a rabbinic commandment to remember what they do in Eretz Yisrael, what they did in the Mikdash. And there are relevant halachot that have to do with that. And I always bring this example because Yossi once made challahs a few years ago. My husband, I don't know who Yossi is, and he forgot to take challah. Like he baked the challah, and right when Shabbos had come in already, he turned to me and he said, "I forgot to separate the challah." We had a bunch of guests coming and a whole bunch of beautiful challahs, and Yossi ran to the Rav, thank God there's a lot of them around us here in Yerushalayim, and said, what do we do about the challahs? And he said, if you were outside of Israel right now, it's a rabbinic commandment to take challah. The fact that you didn't take it, there's things we could do that we could figure it out, that you can eat the challah. The fact that you're in Israel right now, and it's a biblical commandment to take challah, and you did not take challah, you cannot touch the challah. Until after Shabbos, there were things we could do. It said it's muktzah, you can't touch it, you can't do anything with it. And it was that's the first time I was like, wait, in Israel it's biblical, outside of Israel it's rabbinic, there are actual practical consequences sometimes that happen as a result of that. So the opinion that says that counting the Omer is a rabbinic commandment, even though, as Nechama said, she saw it clearly in the Torah, is because there's opinions that say it's linked to the sacrifice. The sacrifice we no longer have, therefore the biblical commandment is not relevant until the Beis HaMikdash comes. It's a rabbinic commandment to remember what they used to do. And now the Nechama said, well, what were they doing that now we're remembering but we're not doing? We're going to get to that. The opinion of the Rambam, I always mix this up now. I don't have it in front of me. It's the Ramban, right?
I remember having a fight about this with somebody last year, so I think it's Ramban.
Okay, I also think it's the Ramban. The Ramban's opinion is that counting the Omer is biblical. today. Now, why would he say that? Why would he say that it's a biblical commandment today to count the Omer? Again, straightforward, not a trick question. Because it says it in the Torah. And you say, oh, but it says it next to the commandment to bring the sacrifice. But they're two separate mitzvahs. The Rambam's opinion is they're two separate mitzvahs. One of them is not relevant today because we don't have a Mesa Mikdash. One of them is because we can still physically count, right? So the Rambam's opinion is, the Ramban, I'm going to have to check it up, and there are many other poskim who like hold into, these are two general camps of opinions, that whatever they were doing in the time of the temple, when they were counting the Omer, is relevant for us today because it's biblical, okay? So far we're following, right? Okay. Then the Rebbe brings, in the Maimer, a very interesting opinion when it comes to, is counting biblical, is counting rabbinic. He brings somebody by the name of Rabbeinu Yerucham, who had a halachic work. And in this halachic work he writes that counting the weeks, keeping track, are we in the first week, the second week, all the way up to the seventh week, keeping track of weeks is rabbinic, is a rabbinic commandment, and counting the days is biblical. Okay? Alona, you're like, what the heck, right?
Yeah, why is counting weeks part of it?
Are we counting weeks?
Okay. So in the Gemara it says, we are commanded in the Torah to count that we should count for ourselves the days between Shavuot and between Pesach and Shavuot. The Gemara says, mitzvah lemimnei yoima, mitzvah lemimnei shvuai. It's a commandment to count the days. It's a commandment to count the weeks. The Gemara tells us that the obligation includes keeping track of both the days and the weeks. And if you look at inside, when we read where we're holding, we mention both. We're this and this many days, and we're this and this many weeks. We keep track of both. This comes from the Gemara. So, until Rabbeinu Yerucham came along, these were never seen as two separate things, though. It was just like, okay, incorporated into this mitzvah of keeping track of where we're holding between Pesach and Shavuos, we keep track of where we're holding in days and holding in weeks. Rabbeinu Yerucham says that the days and the weeks and the keeping track of each one are two different avodas within the counting of the Omer. And that the avoda represented, we're going to get to what those avodas are. And the truth is, I'm not being so fair because the Rebbe first explains the avodas and then brings this in, and so maybe the order I'm doing it is a little bit backwards. There's an avoda represented by counting weeks that is rabbinic. And what do we say when we say that it's rabbinic? What's the significance of saying that the counting of the weeks is rabbinic and not biblical, based on what we said previously?
It isn't what they were doing at the time.
It's not relevant, exactly. We're not doing exactly what they did, we're remembering what they did. Rabbinic means we're remembering what they did, but the avoda that was corresponding to what they did, we don't do today. And so according to the Tosfos, we said, not already, what's the Tosfos now says that it's rabbinic, right? So according to the Tosfos, the whole thing is rabbinic. The whole thing is just remembering. According to Rabbeinu Yerucham, the counting of the weeks is remembering what they used to do, not relevant for us today. The counting of the days is biblical, which means that it is relevant for us today. Okay? And it's a very, very weird opinion. The Rebbe takes this very weird opinion that on its face.
The Rebbe says that?
The Rebbe brings these opinions in his Chassidic discourse. All these opinions, the Tosfos, the Rambam, and then he brings Rabbeinu Yerucham, which when you read, if you would just come across this Rabbeinu Yerucham on your own, which you probably wouldn't, I mean, I know I wouldn't, but, on the internet, sometimes you come across these, less than in the Sfarim, you see, wait, there's this opinion, this halachic opinion that says that counting weeks is rabbinic and counting days is biblical. Isn't that that's the weirdest thing. Like, how do you separate the counting weeks from the counting days? They seem to be one thing. Separating them to the point that one is one type of mitzvah, one is another. And so the Rebbe beautifully explains this question, which is what we would call a nigla question, not a Chassidic, secret Kabbalistic question. It's just a practical question in halacha and understanding it according to Chassidus, and explains it beautifully. He says like this. The Rebbe says that the korban omer represented an avoda which was an avodah of elevating the mind of the animal soul, which we said we don't have the sacrifices today, we don't have the obligation to do that today. And there are some opinions that say even when that was the case in the temple, not everybody was holding on that level that they could do it. One Kohen would come up and do it for everybody, the avodah of elevating their mind. It wasn't something that even in the time of the temple, according to some opinions, every person on their own could do. Because it's a completely different way of perceiving the world. If your mind has been completely elevated, it's never going to selfish things and self-preservation and anxiety and worry. It's only connected to God. So that, according to all opinions, we don't have the sacrifice today. It's a biblical commandment that is not relevant for us today. The avodah, the service corresponding to that of elevating the mind of the animal soul, is not relevant for us today. Okay? That's very self-understood. Then it comes to the counting.
So the mitzvah that they did at the time of the Beit HaMikdash was doing an offering of an animal every single day, and
One day.
the
The day after Pesach, they brought a
okay,
sacrifice.
So what were they actually doing during the count?
That's the question. So there was one day where they was doing this elevation of the mind, and then they started counting, which was right after the sacrifice. They started counting from that day all the way up to Shavuot. What were they actually doing? Now, there's two parts of what they were doing, the Rebbe says. Counting weeks. How many weeks are there between Pesach and Shavuot?
6.
7. 7 weeks. The completion of the 7th week happens on Shavuot. What does Shavuot mean? Weeks. Okay? So the completion of that 7th week happens on Shavuot. So we count 7 weeks. What do we know about the animal soul and the number 7? Look at the board. Cheat sheet over here. There are 10 sephiros, right? We know that. So what is 7? What's unique about 7 here?
Is it the bottom of
Seven,
it?
right?
The bottom 7. What are the bottom 7 as opposed to the top 3?
Well, they're right there.
They're right there. What's the difference? In Chassidus, they're put into two very clear categories, to the point that actually the top 3 are called the mothers, and the bottom 7 are called the children. What are the bottom 7 versus the top 3?
They're parts of the body?
Yes,
But I don't know what
according to
malchut
Kabbalah.
is. I don't know where malchut falls on the body.
On the body,
Is that like
legs, according to Kabbalah.
thought-
If we're going to go to Kabbalah, the feet. So the
Oh,
right thigh, the left thigh, the top 2, and then the actual feet is malchut. And there's verses that they bring that shows interesting on that.
Whoa,
Like,
yeah,
here
that's
we're
actually really cool. Because like malchut is like leadership and that's actual action. So walk the walk now.
Beautiful. Yeah. Now I'm not asking about as it relates to the body, but as it relates to the soul. There are 10 sephiros.
Mind and emotions.
Mind and emotions. You guys familiar with this idea? There are 3 sephiros. 3 sephiros, Chochmah, Bina, Das, which are the mind sephiros of the animal soul or the godly soul, depending on which one you're talking about. And then there are 7 emotional sephiros. Okay, starting with Chesed, kindness, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. These are the 7 emotional spirits. They're called the children because the mothers, sometimes you say the mother and the father, the Chochmah and the Bina and the Das, our mind, our intellect give birth to emotions, right? Which is why we believe that our mind can control our emotions, because the emotions stem from the mind. Okay? So 7, the number 7, when it comes to the animal soul, will be referring to the 7 emotional spheros, emotions of the animal soul. Yes, the 7 emotions of this animal soul. So when we say that we count 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, and when we understand that the counting, their sphera means, or Sparta means to count, and sapir means to make shine, to refine what's going on. What's the avoda that they were doing in the time of the temple between Pesach and Shavuot, when it as corresponds to 7?
We don't count the first We don't count Keter, Bina, Chokmah, Dat when we are doing the count.
Correct.
We start with Chesed
Correct.
as the first day of the month.
Correct. And the reason for that is because the elevation of the Chochmah Bina Das happened on the one day of the bringing the sacrifice, which is like not Chochmah Bina Das all at once. It's kind of like when I heard a shiur on this to explain it, because I was like, what does this even mean? The rabbi explained it as like it happened in one day because it's literally just a switch in consciousness, and that happens at once, as opposed to it's just now your mind, which has been the animal soul. We've spoken about this. Where's the primary residence of the animal soul in the body? In the heart. Where's the secondary residence of the animal soul in the body? Its second holiday home.
Stomach.
No,
I would say
that would make
stomach.
sense. Brain.
Actually, no, people say stomach is your second brain. So.
There is that. You do say that. So, what's the significance of that? That the animal soul is primarily ruled by the heart, by the emotions, and secondarily ruled by the mind, because the mind is tied and subservient to the emotions. And actually, the process of refining the mind would be to have the mind no longer be subservient to the heart, but rather to be subservient, so no longer subservient to what's below it, and instead subservient to what is above. What's above the brain? Hashem. So to realign the mind, the Chochmah Bina Das with Hashem, it's explained that happens in one moment, in one day. It's a switch that happened, and that's it. It's a disconnect. Pardon?
On Pesach?
That happened the day after Pesach. The day after Pesach, the day after the first day of Pesach, so the second day of Pesach, technically, because Pesach is longer. That was corresponding to the sacrifice that they brought. That sacrifice was the switch that happened in terms of avoda, where now the animal soul's mind, Chochmah Bina Das, is no longer dependent, tied down, subservient to the emotions, and now it's realigned with its source, with Hashem. So that happens at once. It's a switch.
So like instead of it like being like driven by the emotions, it's now only driven by Hashem.
Exactly. Now, does that sound practical to us? Absolutely not. If somebody achieved that level of avoda, he's called a tzaddik, 100%. And so that's clear. We don't have that sacrifice today. We don't have that avoda today. And even those who did, not everyone brought their own individual body sacrifice. There were certain representative centers to do it. And so too, there's this idea that there was a certain level of achievement, even in those times.
So the korban Pesach was brought on the second day?
Second day of Pesach. There's a song that goes from second day of Pesach to Shavuos, we count the Omer. I don't even remember the tune very much. That's how I always remember it. From the second day of Pesach till Shavuos, we count the Omer. And if you see in Parshas Emor, God says on the Macharas Shabbos, the day after Shabbos, the day after Pesach, we bring the sacrifice. The Rebbe
We're not talking about the korban Pesach. We're talking about the Omer.
Now we're talking about the Omer. So we said korban Pesach means the top three the top three spheres of the animal soul, Chochmah Bina Das, get elevated, get refined.
You are talking about the korban Pesach was on the second day of Pesach?
The korban Pesach was on the second day of Pesach, and the start of the count was also on the second day of Pesach, right?
But I thought that.
Pesach on the second day?
Yeah, I thought it was before.
It was, of course, it was. When was
I
it?
thought that.
Like Erev Pesach.
Yeah.
No.
And you eat it by the Seder.
Sorry, not the korban Pesach, the korban Omer.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's
That's
what I
what I was
thought,
meaning. The
korban
korban
Omer.
Omer. Sorry, I was like, what is happening?
Okay.
The korban Omer. Is that what you? Okay.
I asked if it was the korban Pesach.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. The korban Pesach.
So the
Pesach.
korban Omer was the barley offering.
Was the barley offering brought on the second day of Pesach? We said barley corresponds to the animal soul. What animal soul avoda is going on corresponding to the sacrifice? The moich. And the Rebbe explains that because it was a grain, it was a barley grain, so it was an animal grain. Grain is connected to the mind. Because there's a Gemara that says that a child doesn't know his father until he's tasted dagan, until he's tasted grain. A child doesn't recognize this is my father until he's reached a certain stage of maturity where now he can actually
Eat solids.
eat solids, basically.
Because before that,
Basically.
he's just an extension of his mother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So there, the Rebbe connects it's a certain understanding that comes into a child, brain stuff, intellect with grain. Okay, so that's how we take the fact that it was an animal grain sacrifice. It was a avoda of refining the brain of the animal soul, the Chochmah Bina Das of the animal soul.
So the the korban that we bring at the end of the count, that one, is it called the korban shavuos?
That is, what's the name of it? So it wasn't called the korban shavuos. It was a korban mincha that was brought.
The
Shnei lechem, right? It's called the shnei lechem, the 2 loaves.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's another avoda.
So
Maybe we'll learn about what that avoda is tomorrow.
But when you
talking about one carbon.
Now we're talking about the korban omer.
when you said that
That's
at
it.
the time of the Beit HaMikdash they did one offering at the end of the 7 weeks, that was a shnei lechem.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow.
There was no
that,
animal
what was the
sacrifice
avoda?
then, right?
No, it was a mincha. Mincha was grains. Maybe we'll talk about that. That would be really cool. Because now we're talking about what the avoda is of these ones. What's the avoda of the Shavuos offering? Okay, so now we're trying to understand. We said that's a side. The chokhmah being being elevated, corresponding to the omer sacrifice. We don't have sacrifices today. We don't have that sacrifice today. Not relevant. Okay, so for us to have said, I did Sfiras Omer, we don't have to have done that. Okay, it's not an obligation for us today at all. What is an obligation? That's a question. There are some opinions who say that counting the days and weeks between Pesach and Shavuot are biblical, which would mean that the avoda that they did, which we're going to talk about what that is relevant for us today. There are some who say it's rabbinic, which would say that even the avoda of counting the Omer, in addition to the Omer sacrifice, is not relevant today. Okay? So
Wait, what was the first thing you said?
there's 2 opinions.
The avoda.
The avoda of the counting of the Omer. There's actually 3 opinions, but the 2 broad ones are, one is the avoda is relevant, one is the avoda is not relevant, and then there's Rabbeinu Yerucham who says the counting weeks element of the avoda is not relevant, the counting days element of the avoda is relevant. So what the heck is going on? What does that mean? Okay?
I feel like the counting days seems pretty relevant because that's when you know that you're focusing on the intersection point of these energies in yourself.
Yep. You got it. Yep. So what is the counting? That's exactly what the Rebbe is going to say. That the counting of the weeks, there are 7 weeks, there are 7 emotions. The avoda is that by the end of week number 1, okay, if a person was really counting the Omer in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and he was counting it as is expected of him, or today, according to some opinions, at the end of week number 1, what's the first emotional attribute, emotional sephira of the animal soul? What's the first one? Chesed. At the end of week 1, he has a week for this, because this is a big deal. His chesed, the attribute of his chesed, his kindness, of his animal soul has been elevated, has been refined. The entire attribute of chesed, everything that comes along with that is included in that. What would that look like practically? He's loving God. He's giving to, you could give to terrible causes, you could give to good causes, right? So he is, this is an important distinction. When we talk about refining the emotions of the animal soul, we don't mean that now he's doing the thing, that he wasn't giving and now he's giving, so he's refined his chesed, or he wasn't putting boundaries, now he's putting boundaries. We mean that the giving that he did was for Hashem, that the love that he felt was for Hashem when it comes to chesed. So the refinement of week number 1 of chesed would mean that every single time that I feel love or generosity in my heart, as it comes up, not as I direct it, but as it comes up, it's for Hashem. It's never selfish. It's never evil. It never has ulterior motives. It's for Hashem. And that would mean I've completed week number 1 when it comes to what counting weeks represents, right? Because we're trying to now separate what's the difference between counting weeks and counting days. Week number 2 finishes. Now you've finished the Sephira of Gevura, which means that every single time you feel judgment, every single time you feel even hatred, it's hatred towards anything that opposes God, and not hatred towards your fellow or anything that represents God. It's boundaries put in place to enable the service of God, judgment for the sake of God, and not for any other ulterior motive. So when we talk about refining, when we talk about counting weeks, what's the avoda of counting weeks? Refining each sephira as a whole, as we would say, beklalut, in its entirety, in the general form, and all the little points that come along with that automatically would get refined. The klal, the general emotion has been elevated, has been refined, is now directed towards God, not directed towards selfish things. Now, is this? Did anyone do this? Has anyone got chesed in the back, gevura in the back? Check. Raise your hand. Not me, right? Now, the Rebbe says that Rabbeinu Yerucham says that counting weeks is rabbinic. What do we say rabbinic means? It's a rabbinical commandment, not biblical. What would that mean practically?
Not relevant. It's like not relevant to today.
It's not, right? What did you say? It's not from
Oh,
the
that's
Torah.
fine, that's fine.
Yeah. It's that the commandment in the Torah that the Gemara says includes counting weeks and counting days. It's not relevant for us today. The way that the Torah expressed it, which was that counting weeks means that you actually refine your chesed and your gvura totally. But rather, it's a zeicher lemikdash. It's rabbinic, which means we're remembering that in the time of the temple, and that at the time of the desert, the original count, when the Jewish people said, we're counting weeks, we're making each week count, we're refining each week, each sephira has been given to Hashem. Each emotion of the animal soul is now directed towards God. Okay? And that's rabbinic, Rabbeinu Yerucham says.
So, which means that it's just in order to remind us of what happened. We aren't experiencing it today.
Correct. We are not experiencing it, and we're not expected to experience that. Is that not a relief? Sorry, for me, when I learned that, I was like, thank God.
Like, we can do our best to work on it, but, like, we can't, we're not obligated to, like...
So we are obligated in something, the Rebbe is going to say, according to Rabbeinu Yerucham, the counting days is biblical. So we have to be, okay, so what is expected of us today? Because there is work that needs to be done. But it's clearly not the work that actually many people talk about, that you need to change your sephiras. The way that they show up in your heart automatically is not in our control. It's just not, and therefore it's not expected of us to change, and therefore counting weeks is rabbinic. The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, once told his wife, Rebbetzin Sterna, I always forget, is it Sterna or Sterna Sarah? Sterna Sarah. So Sterna was the wife of the Alter Rebbe. Yeah? Thank you. Okay. So Sterna Sarah, I was mixed up. Rebbe says Sterna Sarah is quoted as having said that her husband, the Rebbe Rashab, turned to her and said, I have spent my whole life trying to refine just one emotion, and I still haven't succeeded. Now, what does that mean on a level of Rebbes and Tzaddikim? But this work, what we could take from that is this work of refining emotions of our animal soul is deep stuff. It's deep stuff. It's not happening in 1 week for sure, okay? Whether it's happening in a lifetime is questionable, okay? So then we're left with counting days. The Rebbe explains this so beautifully. How many days are there? So we said there are 7 weeks.
49.
There are 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. Shavuot is the 50th day, which we don't count, it counts itself. What's the significance of 49? How did we get to 49?
707.
7 times 7, right? 7 times 7. So there are 7 weeks, there are 7 sephiros, there's 7 emotional attributes of the animal soul. And within each one of those emotional attributes, there are 7 divisions. There's chesed as it's included within chesed, chesed as it's included within gevura, and so on and so forth. And then with each one until you get to 49, right?
They're all connected. They're all connected.
They're all connected. We're in Olam HaTikun, the world of rectification, where everything works together. Now, the Rebbe says, what's the significance of the avoda of counting days? What does it mean that I counted my chesed of chesed, which according to Rabbeinu Yerucham is a biblical commandment for us to do today, is a relevant avoda that's expected of us today. Okay, so today, day number 1 is finished, and I refine my chesed of chesed. Then I refine my chesed of gvura, and so on, 49 of them. The spheres as they are interconnected. What would that mean practically? What have I refined? What have I changed? Because clearly I haven't changed the whole sephira. That's the week as a whole. I've refined the sphere as it's included within another sphere, or as it's included within itself. So the Rebbe explains, and this is like, we're doing this super quickly, okay? I think when I learned it last year with the girls, it took like two weeks or so, 3 weeks. The Rebbe explains that the sephiras, as they're connected one within the other, is referring to each sephira as it, not as it comes up automatically in our heart, each emotion as it shows up in our heart, but each emotion as it's then directed outward. And every emotion has 7 ways of being directed outward. So let's bring an example of chesed, okay? Chesed is an emotion of, what would be the one good word for chesed?
Love.
What emotion? Love, right? You say kindness. Kindness is more of an action, right? Then the emotion of chesed would be love, okay? So the refinement of chesed in general, the animal soul, we said would mean that every time I feel love in my heart, it's a love that is kosher, okay? It's a love that is for God. What would it mean that I've refined, though? The chesed of chesed. The outward direction of that love in a way of chesed. What would that look like?
When you do any action, it's for God. Of love.
Exactly. That the action, the expression, the kindness that I express outward is for God, even if the chesed, the emotion, is still not for God. Okay? So we can have that in 49 different ways. I can feel the emotion of hatred in my heart. I can feel the emotion of gevura, which has not been refined, which is an emotion of, good to see you, have a good day, which is the emotion of hatred is a strong word, but, you know,
It's not hatred.
the Rebbe uses the word hatred in the mimer, but there are gevura could be setting boundaries,
He says it in English?
judgment, sina.
He says
I
see,
feel like it's opposition.
but he says the word hatred.
But hatred could be very positive. It says about tzaddikim that how can you know how much they love God? It depends on how much they hate the physical world. That they come together, they're actually two sides of the same coin. Because
But
if you love someone,
because aren't you supposed to be?
because we're not tzaddikim, we're supposed to be involved in the world. But if you love someone okay, you know how much you can know you love someone? Depending on how much you hate the people who are trying to hurt them. Okay? Maybe it's a dramatic way of saying it, but they really are two sides of the same coin. We hear the word hatred and it's like a very, and I remember as a kid I was told, don't use that word, like hate. It's a very strong word.
No.
Love is a very strong word too. And the more that you love someone, the more that you absolutely hate anything that's trying to harm that person that you love, or anything that's trying to get in the way, right? And so maybe we shouldn't use the word hate, but there's what's a more subtle word than hate? An annoyance. Despise. A dislike.
No, I feel like it's like,
thought
what
there
are
was
you attracted to
boundaries.
versus what are you repelled from?
Mm-hmm.
But like
Yes.
repulsion sounds even worse than
Repulsion
hatred.
in a way sounds even worse.
Yeah, hate doesn't like
No,
sound.
hate sounds so bad for me, but it's also like
Hate
different,
sounds like such.
like we all have different
Different
connotations.
connotations,
We have different
100%.
experiences with these words.
100%.
I feel like it's what you automatically turn away from.
Yes.
So
Gevura is that like reining in.
It's like protecting,
I thought it was a boundary.
Gevura is also boundaries.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When it comes to the Sephiros, you're going to
There's
get
two
30,000
sides.
words for each for each one.
Like
Not
chesed
30,000.
could be like viewed as like, oh, you're a sucker and everyone wants you if you give too much.
100%.
So like we think of
100%.
love as like, oh, that's a good thing. Then like if you
Love can destroy,
Yeah.
right? Love can be destructive, just like hatred, if it's channeled in the wrong way. But let's focus on chesed. It's just easier. You can
Yeah.
extrapolate. You use that word, right? You can
Yeah.
extrapolate on chesed to all of them. And the Rebbe does this actually. He gives us examples of chesed as it's included in all of the different sephiros of the animal soul and the godly soul, and then leaves it up to us to then extrapolate to all the other ones how that works. But chesed of gevura. Let's talk about that. Chesed of gevura. So chesed would mean the emotion. Actually,
love of boundaries, maybe.
I thought. Wait.
so no.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Because we're not actually making it one thing. We're keeping them separate. Just like Rabbeinu Yerucham keeps the counting of the weeks, the original emotion that we're counting that week, separate from the extension, from the secondary emotion of that week, which is the days. He separates the days and the weeks. So chesed would be the emotion in its entirety. Chesed of chesed would be the emotion as it's expressed out into the world. So the emotion of chesed as it then expressed out in a way of chesed, which could be, I feel in my heart love, and therefore I'm generous. Now that love that I feel in my heart could be a love for myself, because maybe I haven't refined fully the emotion as it shows up in my heart. So I feel love in my heart for myself. Okay? I feel a selfish urge, okay, that I want to give into. And because I love myself, I want to, give that to myself. And I, instead of giving into that love that I feel in my heart, that selfish love for myself, outwardly I express that in a way of chesed. I channel that in a way of being generous that's in line with Hashem, which means sometimes giving to myself, being generous to myself, doesn't just mean to others, but in a way that's in line with Hashem. Gevura of chesed. Chesed is the emotion. Gevura is the outward expression of it. Because I love you, I'm actually not letting you do this thing. Right? We do that to kids all the time. We feel chesed in our heart and we act out in a way of gevura. Right? So that, and we could go on and on and on and on. And Sydney last year, our student last year, she took as a project to bring example, I don't know if for all 49 of them, but for a lot of them, what that actually looks like practically. What would that mean? What would chesed of tiferes mean? And netzach of hod mean, right? But if you take this formula of that, basically the first, you could do it for today. Where are we holding today?
Gevura of Malchus.
Gevura of Malchus.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Because we have 5 more days to Shavuos. Okay. Gevura of Malchus. Okay, so the primary one is the second one, Malchus. That's the week that we're counting. Okay, so that's the emotion that comes up in our heart, and then the Gevura is the way that we express outwardly that emotion. Now, Malchus is a bit of a tricky one because there's 2 broad opinions of. There are some that say that Malchus is Bechlal and all not an emotion, and that it's an action, and Malchus represents the action of all of those emotions. But there is opinions of Chassidus that describe the emotion of Malchus and describe it in a way of, it's called in Hebrew, romamut. It's always the hardest one for me to describe. When an emotion of aloofness, of being above, but not in a way of arrogance, although maybe the animal soul's expression of that would be in a way of arrogance. But sometimes in order for you to truly involve yourself in a situation, you have to rise above it, right? That would be the emotion of Malchus, of differentiating yourself from the thing. Okay? Malchus means royalty. The king and his family, in order to actually rule the nation, have to separate themselves from the nation and be above it, in order to then be able to have chesed of Malchus and gvura of Malchus and Tiferes, in order to give and to serve the country in the way that they need to serve. So Malchus is this sovereignty. It's called this.
Is it like confidence?
No, it's not. It's maybe. The way that I would describe it with a mashal. Did anybody here grow up with the shluchim's kids around them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, grow up. I mean, like at
as
some
you were
point.
older, or like you see.
Mm-hmm.
So this is maybe. I hope this isn't taken the wrong way, but this is the example that I thought of. That there are shluchim who move into a neighborhood, right? And their kids either go to the school of the neighborhood, or they definitely mingle with the other kids who are not holding in the same religious level, or maybe bless you, they're not holding in the same value system, and yet, more often than not, the shluchim's children are the influences and not being influenced, right? Why? Because of this malchus, there's a feeling not of arrogance, not of better than, but of separateness, of you could almost say confidence, but like I know who I am, and I know that in order for me to help you, to connect to you, all the different spheres, inside this connection, to fight for you, to beautify you, to respect you, I know that I need to separate myself on an emotional level to some extent.
How do the kids do that?
So that's part of just the education of
I feel like they just know that they're different,
yeah.
but like not in a
negative way.
Yeah.
Just like, and it's weird to correlate children.
Because also the parents are like, I don't know,
It's like being
I've
born
observed-
nobility.
I've observed like the parents like explaining to the kids are like, are they not Jewish? Like, why are they driving here on Shabbat? Like, why are they talking about like these, like in like whatever, they're all in like preschool with like non-religious kids, so like, but in their Chabad preschool, I'm like, they're like why, like, what are these characters the other kids are talking about, like, and they're just like not really interested, like it doesn't really matter to them. It's like,
I'll tell you that I experienced that, and it's been very interesting to watch because when I was in school in Cape Town, my friends were religious but not Chabad, okay, and like holding in all different all different levels of religion, and I was friends. Like one of them is my best friend till today, like friends, real friends, not like I'm friends with you, but like real friends. While at the same time, I knew that we were different, and so it wasn't an issue when they were all talking about movies. I would get annoyed sometimes, but like me and my sister would just like leave, whatever. Like we would, not in a maybe sometimes in a obnoxious way. I don't know. We were kids at the end of the day, but it wasn't so difficult because like we don't do that. My sisters now have other Chabad girls in their class, and the other Chabad girls are watching movies, and that means now it's all out the window. You hearing where I'm going with this?
Kinda.
But
there's a difference between
I grew up, I
shluchim
was
and
the
chabad.
Shluchim's kids, and I don't know, like, I grew up, like, kind of watching movies and stuff, but I don't think that was, like, the part that separated us. I think it was a sense of, like, people are looking at you,
I'm not saying that because the other Chabad girls are watching movies, they can't have that shluchim. I'm saying that feeling that I had in school of, but we're different, and therefore it doesn't bother me because I'm above this. You can't have that same feeling when your fellows are also Chabad around you.
I had no
That's what
Chabad
I'm
friends,
saying.
so I was like...
And I found that when I left that school and I went to high school, a Chabad high school, I started watching the TV shows that just put it out there that I used to like. I don't do that. Now it's like, well, the people around me are doing that, and I lost that speed, that emotion of malchus. And we all need to have that. It's not just a shluchim's kids thing, right? To have that sense of that. It's hard to find one word for what I'm describing of
Like, did the
malchus.
other kids like think that you were like, oh, I'm so much better? Like,
So
did they think that
sometimes
you were-
yes, because as kids, and that would be, you could call almost the malchus of the animal soul, right? I'm separating myself from you because I think I'm better than you, right?
Did the other kids think that you were like?
Usually not. I remember there was one time that during Sphera, everyone was going to a Justin Bieber concert. And I was getting so mad.
Oh, so
they
that
were
was
all-
really extreme. Oh, okay. Now I see what you mean.
And I was like,
Because they're not
then I was just like
religious when you're
mad.
shluchim.
I was
You
like,
said they were
if you're going to a
religious.
Justin Bieber concert, don't talk about it,
That's what
first
I'm
of all.
saying.
And second of all, you're going during Sphera
Wait,
and
you
you're
were
not
a
listening to that
shluchim
music.
kid?
I was
So the people that you knew, they weren't religious at all,
So
or they were.
they were different levels of
Everyone was
religious.
like more traditional in South Africa,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
Christian
I'm like-
And honestly,
Oh,
to be
so
honest,
like
a lot of them were
I was
religious,
like
but they were going to
religious
Justin Bieber.
things.
And I remember
Okay.
then I had to be like cool.
I never
like,
learned
chill.
about like what severe was.
What do you mean you
Like
didn't
that was
call
like
it?
one
I
of
got
the
really
last
mad.
things I learned that. I didn't learn about until like 7 or 8. Didn't know what it
Usually you
was.
finish before
I know. I started something without papers in front of me. That's the problem.
No one
We'll
ever taught
continue
me
with
what
this
it was.
tomorrow, okay?
It was never talked about.
Pardon? I got
had
called
no
in and
idea
told like
that
chill,
it was a
like
holiday.
everyone's allowed to do what they want.
By your parents?
No, by the
And
school,
the
because
9 days
at that
also,
point
that was,
it
like, one
became
of
Because
like
it's not like such a big
what you're
deal.
doing
Like,
is wrong.
To
It's
teach
like,
what about Pesach
chill.
of the 9 days.
Everyone can do
it's
their
like-
own thing. So there were
Do you know,
times
like,
because
what, you're talking about like Hebrew
You were like judging him for
But also
not
after I switched
following
to
the
Jewish
vote,
school, like,
and they were like,
like
and
never
they just
talked
had to put you back on track,
Yeah.
being like,
Yeah.
no, we're not judgmental. Like this is
yeah, and just like you know,
Our
and then I
we don't
realized that
talk-
it came from the fact that
in my,
I
like,
was
basic
jealous
was,
because
like,
everyone was going somewhere.
You didn't talk about it a lot
Cool,
either.
and like
You all knew about it. That was different, but like...
So we're all